more in-depth version of the first book. It's got about 300 more pages, and so they're not quite the same, no.
Thanks, because I did read that book several years ago, and I guess we'll start talking about the cross, or actually the two crosses, as a matter of fact. You did talk about it in your, I believe it was the the Nostradamus 2012 History Channel documentary about what you found in regards to your research on the Great Cross of Henday. You describe it as a monument to the end of time. Well, that kind of does make sense, and I'd like to tell you why. What did happen on December 21st, 2012? Well, I'll give you three different sources here. Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartz has said that was the first time we got to experience universal dream time, first time everybody got to experience a time. We weren't consciously aware of it, but our soul essence did experience universal dream time, and we basically got to decide whether we were going to be sheeple or try to expand our consciousness and fight for freedom. So that's that in a nutshell. There was also Andromeda Council contactee Tolek, who said that was the day the Earth's core blossomed into a fourth dimensional density consciousness level, and over the course of time the Earth would go into 4D, and that was caused by the planetary alignment that happened on that day with the Earth, the Sun, in the center of the galaxy, putting energy there. But in regards to the end of time thing, Jim Self has basically said that December 21st, 2012, that was when time ceased to exist, because on that day we became free, in the sense that it doesn't matter what we do after that time. This timeline that we're on is going to have an ultimate positive ending result, whatever that may be, whenever that may be, and it doesn't matter what we do because that's already set to happen. So in that sense, we are free, and in that sense, time doesn't exist anymore, although some people from point of view might look at it differently. Well, that's why I think maybe that there is some truth to the fact that date 12/21/2012 was an end of time. But in regards to the monument correlating with that, I'll give you the floor on this. Tell us about the monument, what it means, and how it correlates to the end of time in 2012.
Well, I will in a second. There's another thing that occurred, which I'm trying to draw attention to, but has been largely overlooked by everybody, and that is that Obama was, in the 2008 election, was using a lot of the language of the 2012 movement. A lot of the language that he was using came from one of my films that I produced, 2012, The Odyssey. And it was quite startling when he was running for president, because he was pulling full quotes out from my films, and made me suspicious of him and a little weirded out and scared. And as we approached the date 12/21/12, I began thinking to myself that Obama has obviously shown that he's hyper aware of this meme, and he was willing to use language to kind of steal the meme in a political sense. And so as we were getting closer and closer to 12/21/12, I began thinking, that they were going to pull something. And exactly 1 week before 12/21/12 was Sandy Hook, in which 26 people died. And 26 is a Mayan number, 2,600, 260, 26,000, but really 27 people died. But the media just kept reporting it as 26. And I think what happened is that Sandy Hook it wasn't a mass awakening so much as the awakening that you're talking about. Because we were becoming collectively awake at the same time that they pulled Sandy Hook, we could actually, for the first time, see what they were doing in a more clear light. It was really the first time that I think the entire conspiracy community woke up to what was really happening, and the fact that there had to be 80 or 90 or hundreds of people involved in this so-called conspiracy, which means that, of course, they think that they can keep it quiet with that many people. Well, as you know, the whole thing against conspiracy theories is that people can't keep quiet, and they're proving here that they can. So I think we did have an awakening, and now I think it's very, very difficult to fool us anymore. And I think so there's a kind of a before Sandy Hook, before 12/14/12 outlook, and then there's a post Sandy Hook, post 12/14/12 that is a much more nuanced and enlightened view of the world. And we now know that what I think it happened is that when they did 9/11, they thought they got away with it for the most part, but the victims' families kept complaining and wanted an investigation, and they didn't like that. And so I think they decided that they weren't going to have any more victims' families. And that way they don't have to worry about victims' families complaining. And I think that when they did that, they exposed the entire staged fakeness of the entire event, and we, looking at it, were awakened. We were awakened not just to the theater of it, but to the audaciousness of it, that they would even try to pull something like this off. And now, the Boston bombings and Charlie Hebdo and all these other things are starting to look as fraudulent as Sandy Hook. And the whole thing is just this wag the dog kind of ordeal that we're watching, a theater of political theater designed to manipulate, and it's really rather scary. But getting back to your original question, because I just want to get that in, the Cross of Henday, the Cross of Henday sat in this churchyard in France for maybe 400 years, 500 years, we're not sure, and it definitely has the erosion patterns of something that's been sitting out in the rain for that long. And I believe that it is a reconstruction of another monument that sat there before, and I believe that we should probably make a new Cross of Henday for future generations, because it's really, in my point of view, probably one of the most important monuments on Earth. It was definitely constructed by a secret society that knows a lot, and they know an awful lot about cosmology and astronomy and world history, and it basically describes our time period. It was looking forward to this time period. Now, obviously, they could have come into contact with the Mayan calendar, or even more, the Inca seem to also have some of these same prophecies, and we know that the Inca conquest by Pizarro, they were grabbing a lot of the Incan objects and things and then taking them back to Spain and having the alchemists look at it. So it could even have come from that direction, or it could have been sitting there for thousands of years, just sitting there, because it's in the middle of the Basque country in south of France, and the Basque are very, very odd people with a very odd DNA and very odd language. And the Basques themselves say that they came to the shores of Spain and France after a catastrophe occurred. So what does the Cross of Henday really say? Well, it goes like this. This is all new evidence that we're just starting to uncover now. But doing research, we now know that examining the pattern of nanodiamonds that are coating North America, we now know that a gigantic comet hit the Earth 13,000 years ago. And it broke up into four pieces and peppered Canada, the bays of Carolina, and threw up so much stuff into the air that it caused a complete freeze, global freeze, 1,600 years long, which is called the Younger Dryas by geologists. And then we know that almost overnight, the Younger Dryas, about 9,400 years ago, 12,000 years ago, suddenly ended. 11,400 years ago, it just suddenly ended. We don't know why. But Robert Schoch, the geologist, he had, in his new book, he has discovered through examining the record, the geological record, that the Younger Dryas was ended, with a gigantic solar flare, coronal mass ejection of the largest variety. and that this is what ended the Younger Dryas, this gigantic freeze-out, which cold temperatures went all the way down to near the equator, by the way. And so when the Younger Dryas ended, it flooded. All the ice had gathered up at the poles, and suddenly this solar flare happened, and all this ice just melted and sent torrents of water out, raising the sea levels by about 250 feet, flooding all the coastal cities that were then around, creating new coasts much further inland, which is like where New York or L.A. or Florida, Miami is right now, while the older cities that were in the civilization before the comet hit are now all buried underwater. So this comet hit, and if you look at panel number, we'll call it the western panel. It's the panel that faces the southern panel. It's the panel that you can see on the Cross of Henday if you're walking down the street in the downtown Henday, and that is the angry sun face with 4 objects, one in each corner surrounding the sun. Well, with the information that we now know, we can now see that panel is probably one of the most prescient, knowledge-filled symbols ever, because it exactly describes the scenario that I just described to you, which is now being completely realized and is the plot of Graham Hancock's next nonfiction book, which is the sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods. So the Cross of Henday was built by someone who survived this catastrophe, a group, a secret society that survived this catastrophe. And this is the same group that built the pyramids at Egypt. The pyramids at Egypt were built to commemorate this situation. They built it so that the Sphinx was facing towards the time of the catastrophe, towards the time of Leo, 13,000 years ago. And they knew that this catastrophe had been so horrendous, so horrible, that they had to ensconce all of their ancient knowledge into the structures at Giza, which unfortunately have been stripped and cleaned, and now we don't know too much about what kind of knowledge was actually put onto the limestone coverings of the pyramids. So we've lost a lot of that. But this is the same group, and they planted their evidence in the Cross of Henday, and then they instructed Fulcanelli, the enigmatic, unknown French alchemist, to write about it and put it into his book so that this cross could get known. That's how I first discovered it. And I decided that I would, investigate the Cross of Henday and see what it was really saying. And the conclusions I came to are the ones I just stated, that it's incredibly advanced knowledge, and it was built by a secret society that was still intact 400 years ago, and maybe still intact 80 or 90 years ago when Fulcanelli was walking the earth, which I think is really good news, because it's a secret society devoted to benevolence and getting information to us about our past and our future. And so the Cross of Henday both points backwards towards this culminating event which changed world history, and to the future when we're going to reawaken back to this consciousness that we had before the comets hit 13,000 years ago. And that's a long answer to a short question.
Okay, what about the cross that's in South America? By the way, I must say I do beg to differ with what you and Vincent Bridges said in your book about South America is Atlantis. I tend to think Atlantis was a lost continent in many different places around the world, from Indonesia to the Pacific to even other places in the Atlantic, and maybe even Egypt, where Atlantis outposts, and that's one reason why there's so many theories on where Atlantis is. But to think that it was South America, I mean, if you want to back that up, I'll give you the chance to back up your theory there. But there is a second cross.
Frankly, I would not have put that in the book, because I really believe that you're right about it, but it got in. That's the way it goes. I do believe, though, if you raise sea levels 200 feet, which we know they were before this catastrophe, then you would be able to take a boat all the way to the Andes. and through the Amazon. The Amazon would, of course, not be there. It'd be all covered in water, and you'd be able to easily take a boat to the Andes. So the fact that there could be boat travel between Europe or Egypt and the Andes is not really very far off at all. And the Inca people say that they did not build Sacsayhuaman or Machu Picchu or any of that. They said that was all built before them, that they just discovered it when they came here. So, this is one of my favorite subjects, is that I believe that there was a very, very advanced culture along the west coast of the Americas, and that it got destroyed by this catastrophe. And this was we have evidence, of course, of this. There's a mummy found in a cave near Reno, Nevada, that's 8 feet tall, with red hair and white skin, beautifully embroidered clothing. We find the same thing in Peru. We keep finding these mummies that are white with red hair, that are clearly not the Inca. And so, I believe that there was a very advanced civilization that was wiped out by the disaster, and that the Asians, the Native Americans who came over the Bering Land Bridge, they kind of discovered the remnants of this destroyed culture. So that's one of my favorite subjects. But anyway, so to me, this is the most joyful news of all, is that, there is a society that's maybe still intact, that knows all of this knowledge, all of this arcane knowledge. And I believe that they're feeding this information out very slowly to us, so that they're changing us. Because I believe this group is anti-Illuminati, and they view the Illuminati as the greatest threat to all life on Earth. And the Illuminati is all power without any of the spiritual enlightenment that this group believes you should have as leaders, and a completely different view of how the world works, and a much more sacred view of the world.
Yeah, but what about that second cross that you talked about that's in South America?
Yeah, so one of the things that happened is that there's a Latin inscription on the top of the cross of Henday. And Fulcanelli informs us that if you can figure out what it is really telling you, then you will find a place of refuge that you can go should there ever have this disaster ever happen again. And, of course, I got naturally very interested in it. And for years, I took the inscription on a piece of paper and just tried to play with it to come up with different things. Then one day I was waiting for someone and pulled out, I was in my car and I was waiting for someone, and had a half hour to kill. And I pulled out the piece of paper and began examining, and had one of those, epiphany moments. And I could see exactly what the inscription was saying. And it was saying, Inca Cave, Cusco, Peru. It was directly translated, the same amount of letters and everything. The Cusco is spelled with a S, not a Z, which is the real proper way to say it in Spanish and spell it. And so now I had this, I had a place, and I had a way to get in. A cave, inside a cave at 14,000 feet in the Andes. Yes, that would be a very safe place to be if a comet came or if a solar flare occurred. So that made sense to me. And then almost in a flash, after seeing that in the inscription, I saw it say, "Hail to the cross of Urkos." And directly, again, exactly the same amount of letters that it had. It worked perfect. I didn't know what the hell Urkos was, though. So as soon as I got home, this is pre-internet, I got out my World Atlas and looked up URCOS to see if there was anything in the world named Urkos, and discovered about 20 miles down the hill from Cusco is a town called Urkos. The next thing that happened was I was talking to William Sullivan, who had written the book Secret of the Incas, and he was with a Incan shaman. This was in Santa Fe, must have been like 90, 92, something like that. And the shaman was there. He was an Incan, and so I walked up to him and I said, "Hi, have you ever been to Urkos?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Is there a cross at Urkos?" And he got real mystified. He said, "Yeah, there's a very mysterious cross that was there even before Christians came. We don't know who built it." I was like, "Really?" So I went to a friend of mine who gave me some money, and I flew down to South America, and I rented a car, and I went to Urkos, and there indeed was a very, very, very old cross that had been broken. I can't quite figure out when it was broken, sometime in the 1950s, and that's very important. And then a new cross had been attached to the old cross's base. But you can see the erosion pattern on the old cross, and it's really old. So I think happened is that the book, the Fulcanelli Mystery of the Cathedrals, which was written by Fulcanelli, it got printed in English in 1957. I think someone bought the book, did exactly what I did, figured out the translation, went down and broke the cross and got the information and stopped it from getting any info getting out beyond that point. So I think there was more information on the Urkos cross that was related to the same information that's on the cross of Henday, and I think someone in Alphabet Agency figured this out because they were very interested in Fulcanelli. The OSS was very interested in Fulcanelli, and so was the CIA. And I think they figured it out, and they stopped the flow. They were afraid that someone would figure this out, and that they would find more information out, which would expose more things and more lies, and so they stopped it. So one of the most disappointing parts of my life is finding that cross had been broken.
Thanks. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about more galactic stuff here. In regards to the galactic alignment, people like Santos Bonacci and even Vincent Bridges, as a matter of fact, would talk about how people are getting the wrong galactic alignment in regards to 12/21/2012. They say it's the Earth, the Sun, and the center of the galaxy aligning. Well, no, that's not the galactic alignment you should be talking about. In the Lost Book of Nostradamus History Channel show, Vincent Bridges did talk about how there is a cross in the sky that's the celestial equator and an arm of the Milky Way galaxy that goes through the dark rift. And then on the ground, there's the mundane cross. It's kind of hard to explain. It's formed by the angles of the equinoxes and the solstices. And in the History Channel show, they did show how that cross is made in relation to the Earth and its tilt. And Vincent said that once every 13,000 years, well, it's more like 12,900, but anyway, once every 13,000 years, that great cross between the mundane cross and the celestial cross, they align. And that eight-spoked cross in the Lost Book of Nostradamus, as the theory goes, the eight-spoked wheel is the cross that's in the sky in that time period. Well, first of all, a couple of things about that. I'm really interested to know, when was the exact time that cross happened? Was it at 11:11, or was it on that day, UCT time, or was it some other time? And also, that I remember that cross, that when it happened 13,000 years ago, it was on the summer solstice and not the winter solstice. Just want to point that out. But in regards to the eight-spoked wheel in the Nostradamus book and that cross, and what you can tell us all you want about this. Give us the floor on. You got the floor on that. Tell us about that galactic alignment and the Nostradamus book.
Yeah, that galactic alignment actually occurred in 2002, right in the middle of the last Katun of the Mayan calendar, and it was, I think it was in September. Yeah, September 21st, I believe it was that date that we crossed into that, and you could almost feel again it was almost palatable. At that time, Bush was gearing up for the first round of the Iraq War, and everyone had just been terrorized by 9/11, and it was a very tender moment for everybody. And then I think really that's when the wake up really began. I think we were reeling from 9/11, and we didn't really understand what was going on yet, who had did it. I mean, I did, but most people didn't. And then on September 21st, 2002, that's right smack in the middle of the last 20 years. Of before 10 years to go to 2012, and 10 years since 1992, which was when that last cartoon, that last 20-year period was really an amazing period, because it started out in 92 and it ended in 2012. In 92, when it started, there was hardly any internet. By 10 years later, by 2002, the internet was going full tilt boogie, and by 2012.
Well, JJ, can I hold you just a moment? You say it happened in 1992. I thought it happened in 1993 because my brother's birthday was actually the day in 93.
You are right. It was 93.
Okay.
Summer of 93.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
No, that's right. I remember now because I did a show with Jose Arguelles on that date. So I know you're right. And I don't know how I got the 92 screwed up. But anyway, so we're now, we're now beyond that, and things are now exponential. And I think, the alignment opened up us to energies that we'd never really experienced, and we're still not over it. It's only now just beginning. We've only gone like 2 steps on a 100-mile journey that towards a full consciousness, and it is happening. And it really is. I know it's happening. Rupert Sheldrake talks about morphogenetic fields and how if I learn something or I figure something out, it makes it easier for everyone else to figure something out. So, it's up to us to, spread the word. That's why I do shows like this, because I know that every time that I say things, that somebody somewhere is going to figure it out, and then they're going to say it, and then more people are going to say it, and pretty soon it's just going to be true. And I talk to younger people all the time, people in their early 20s. It's astounding how much they know, a lot more than I knew when I was their age. So I really believe that this enlightenment happened. I really believe this awakening occurred. It's not occurring in the way that we all kind of thought it would, with this, we all just wake up and we can just be blissed out. Yogananda said people think that enlightenment is bliss, but enlightenment can be sheer terror too. And I really believe that. I think we're going through the sheer terror part of our enlightenment right now. And what we're seeing and what we're finding, listening to you reading the news, it's not a happy place to be necessarily. But at the same time, I'd rather be awake than not, even though it's more painful. So, the web is widening daily. The Illuminati knows this. That's why they're trying to shut down the internet right now. And we have to fight. We have to fight back. We have to fight back hard. And those who did become enlightened and awakened, you're going to be the frontline troops in this thing.
Well, yeah, we're going to be the frontline troops for sure, and we just got to wake up the sheeple and hope they want to become frontline troops in the future.
Yep.
The government, you say they can keep a secret. Well, actually, their secrets get exposed all the time. It's just the common people refuse to believe it because they're paradigmatic, fearful, and stupid. I'm sorry, but that's the fact of life, and I hope to wake those people up. But
Yep.
Moving on, there is another type of cycle besides actually, let's talk about the 26,000-year precession of the equinox cycle, because John Major Jenkins, in his Maya Cosmogenesis 2012 book, which he wrote in 1998, I never read it, but I remember in that book he talked about how he did actually explain that it's not a coincidence that the precession of the equinox lasts 26,000 years and the Earth is 26,000 light years from the center of the galaxy. He explained it had something to do with the precession of protons in relation to something else in regards to distance. If you know what I'm talking about, could you perhaps explain why that's not a coincidence?
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't know. I know John very well, and he and I, discussed this theory years ago. And it's not just that. It's it's there's a whole bunch of weirdnesses. The Earth is 26,000 miles in circumference. The average human being lives about 26,000 days. It is very odd, and I can't explain it to you. I do not know why. This ancient civilization that was destroyed by the comets seemed to have a mathematical system that a system of I can't come up with the right word, correspondences, I guess. And so they would one of their most sacred numbers, of course, is 432, and the sun just happens to be twice that in thousands of miles. So the sun is 864,000 miles wide. The moon is 2160, 2,160 miles in diameter, which is very odd because that's exactly the number of years in 1 month of the precession, 2,160 years. And so there's this freaky relationship between time and space that our ancient ancestors had figured out. And for the life of me, I have no idea how they managed to do this. But if you really want to get into some really weird stuff, get into the work of Randall Carlson. I think he's on the internet, on YouTube. He's the most brilliant sacred geometry person around right now, and he proves beyond any shadow of a doubt the advanced quality of this pre-disaster civilization and how advanced they really were. And again, this is going to be part of Hancock's next book, so it's going to be very interesting. He and Randall Carlson drove from Portland, Oregon to Minneapolis, following the very bottom edge of the ice age that occurred in the Younger Dryas. So we're really making some serious progress here. The narrative of our human civilization is being challenged, and we're finding ways to explain our past without resorting to, we just came out of the caves grunting and killing each other 5,000 years ago bit, which is just not true. So.
Yeah, and since you mentioned 2,160 years, make that number a lot bigger. You get 2,160,000. Why do I bring that number up? Well, Santos Bonacci has talked about in his some of his presentations that every 2,160,000 years, the Earth goes through another type of precession. It rolls around, like cut the number 2,160,000 in half. In that time period, the North Pole will be where the South Pole is, and then go the other half of the cycle, it will be back where the North Pole is. Santos claims this is the real reason we have ice ages, although I do have some reasons to disagree with that, and I'll actually get to that in a little bit later in the interview. But do you in any way, are you familiar with this 2,160,000 year cycle of the Earth rolling around?
Yeah, I know Santos's work. It's very interesting, and there is some evidence to show that might be true. Again, these freaky correspondences of these numbers is what drives me up a wall. I can't, in my mind, I just can't understand how these things, can happen. And again, I refer to Randall Carlson as if you really want to get the download of how advanced our ancestors really were. And by the way, if you examine ancient sites and you look at the mathematical correspondences within these sites, like Randall Carlson has, and Robert Lawler and John Michel, and a lot of great people, you will see that the pyramid complex at Giza has this same kind of mathematical quality about it. Stonehenge has this about it. It's starting to look like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey has these same kind of mathematical, numerical correspondences. And what's really freaky about this is there is one place that's on the Earth that is not an ancient place that uses these same mathematical correspondences. And you know what place that is?
No, I do not.
Washington, D.C.
Oh.
It's very curious, very curious. Whoever designed Washington, D.C. was extremely adept at understanding these weird number correspondences. So, for instance, the Washington Monument is exactly 555 feet tall. And nobody ever really wonders why it's exactly 555 feet tall. But one of the weird things that we're discovering about the ancients is that they had this real predilection for the number 37. And there's harmonic reasons for why 37 was so important to them. Graham Hancock in his book Supernatural goes on for about 4 pages about the number 37 and how he finds it everywhere, in Angkor Wat and in Egypt and everywhere. And he can't understand what this number is. Next time I see Graham, I'll explain it to him. But what this number, what I'm getting to is that if you take 37 times 15, it's 555. 37 times 18 is 666. And so this 37 is dictating these number systems that they're using as measuring and time devices. This is what the 666 is so important. It's not really measuring some kind of satanic thing. It's a measurement that they used in the old days based on this 37 correspondence. And it's freaky, is all I can say. And I haven't reconciled any of this in my head. I can't figure out why the sun should come out to be exactly 864,000 miles in diameter. Exactly. And it's not like 864,001 or 10. It's exactly. The same with the moon. It's exactly 2,160 miles in diameter. And it's almost as if we were living in a universe that has been constructed intelligently using some kind of sacred numerical principles that we still are a mystery to us. I wish I could explain it better than that. I can't.
All right, well, let's talk about what happened 13,000 years ago. You said a comet hit. Some people have debated that. I've heard some people talk about how there was a supernova nearby that affected our solar system in that time period. And other people have talked about how the Nibiru of Zecharia Sitchin lore passed near Earth around that time. And by the way, I'm not going to talk about it in this show, but I have on previous shows talked about how I know Zecharia Sitchin was right about Nibiru's existence and the Anunnaki coming to Earth, and he was not a disinfo agent or fraud. That was all debunked. Not going to talk about it on this show, but the point is some people do assert Nibiru was flying by the Earth around that time, and it was not a comet.
May I suggest that Nibiru is this comet?
Well, if I don't know about that, because you got extraterrestrials living on there, as Sitchin and others have asserted.
The Anunnaki didn't come 13,000 years ago. They were here a long time before that. Even Sitchin says 200,000 years ago.
Yeah, but the thing is, whenever Nibiru came by, they always took that as an opportunity to land on the Earth, as the story goes. So they would have been.
Honestly, even Carl Sagan says it in one of his books. And if you want to successfully travel through space, the best thing to do is find a big asteroid, hollow it out, and live inside. That's your protection from the radiation, and you can spin it and get gravity and everything. So if I was a highly advanced spacefaring race, I would actually expect that moving around in a planet or a gigantic moon or an asteroid or whatever, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Even astrophysicists agree with it. I personally think that there's quite a number of hollowed out moons in our solar system that their orbits are acting very strange, and this pre-catastrophic civilization was very likely spacefaring. And I do believe the Anunnaki came. The Anunnaki are, they play a big part in all of this. I think that I don't think the Anunnaki are necessarily evil, like a lot of people do today. But I think that they came here for specific reasons, and they left us. We're their progeny. I think the white race in particular is Anunnaki progeny, and I've said that for quite a number of years now. And Sitchin himself describes them as blonde-haired and blue-eyed and tall. and so does Michael Tellinger, who's a big Sitchin follower and done a lot of great work following up Sitchin's work in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. So, I forgot the question, but yeah, I'm with you all the way on the Anunnaki.
Again, was about the comet.
But that was 200,000 years ago. We know that because we've done the DNA research. That's when they messed with That's when they messed with this. It was about 200,000 years. But this comet just hit 13,000 years ago. So there's a lot of space.
The evidence for that comet, because some people say a supernova was what.
The evidence is extremely compelling, and I really, I say in my book that it was a super wave from the galaxy Paul Laviolette's theory, and as much as I like that theory, I cannot deny the nanodiamond evidence that exists, and I know that those nanodiamonds could only have come from a comet, and so it's pretty compelling evidence, and I would say by the end of 2016, the evidence is going to be so compelling that it may even alter the standard view of everything. And this goes back to also Göbekli Tepe, right? We know that it was buried by the residents of Göbekli Tepe 13,000 years ago because we organically can date the soil. So what were they doing? Why were they covering up this incredibly advanced city that they had? And the answer is the comet hit, and they knew that their place was going to get destroyed. They were fortunately far enough south where they probably had a little bit of time before the cold came, and they covered up their monument and hoped maybe one day after the disaster was over they could uncover it and resume their highly advanced civilization again. But that really wasn't to be. And now we found it. So now we know that there was an advanced city 13,000 years ago that mysteriously was covered up by humans. And I think this whole narrative is actually becoming quite easy to understand, and we're really getting a handle on it for the first time. And I have to say that it's a lot of people doing a lot of research and checking each other on the internet. So, Robert Schoch can find something and then he spreads it, and then another person will find, Michael Tellinger will find something, and then he spreads it. So it's kind of amazing to watch, and it's going to reach a critical mass here very, very soon.
I hope you're right on that one. And let's talk about what you've said about how you believe the universe is an electric-based universe, and how mainstream science is trying to downplay that. I did mention like Nibiru. Many people say the Anunnaki can't survive on Nibiru; it's too far from the sun. Well,
no.
Here's the thing. In my interview with John Lear and George Kavaslis, also clarified this in my private session with him, that stars are not powered by nuclear fusion; they're electromagnetic. And they transmit electromagnetic energy to the planets, and every planet, regardless of where it's located or how big it is, has its own filtering system, which allows for life to exist on that planet, regardless of its size, location, or type of star it orbits, for that matter, I guess, in some cases. And this is how, I guess, the Anunnaki could survive on Nibiru, and anybody who says you got to take the Drake equation and the Goldilocks zone factor into how life can exist on planets is being way too conservative. So this idea of an electrical universe, why do you believe that? Just like I believe that. Well, why do you believe that? What's the evidence for it?
Well, just that the standard explanations just don't cut the mustard. That's why, because you begin looking and you begin realizing that there's four forces in the universe. There's weak nuclear force, there's strong nuclear force, there's gravity, and there's electromagnetics. And that's it. That's all the forces that they allow. Okay? And the weakest of those four forces is gravity. Yet this is the base of their entire theory, based on the weakest of the forces. And they don't explain the universe at all with electromagnetic theory. And I'm like completely bewildered by that, and do not understand it, cannot understand it. And it's clear that electromagnetics plays a much higher role, not only in planetary creation, stellar creation, but also in human creation and health, and we're electric creatures. And alchemy is about electricity, and so I read Talbot's books and I realized, and Thornhill, and I realized that these guys were right. The Grand Canyon. What had my epiphany was I was flying over the Grand Canyon about 15 years ago, and I looked down at the Grand Canyon, and for the first time I realized that it could only have been made by a gigantic lightning strike. It looks like the results of a lightning strike. You can see where it's coming in from the south, and then it spreads north, and it must have been really spectacular. And then I looked at the big valley, I'm going to forget it now, on Mars. And I realized that, too, looked like a gigantic lightning strike. And then I started reading, and I realized that the sun was hollow, and it's a plasma ball, and sunspots are just holes in the plasma, and you're looking down into the darkness of a hollow sun. And by the way, you wouldn't live, if you were the Anunnaki and you were flying around on Nibiru, you wouldn't live on the outside of the planet. That would be insane. You'd live on the inside of the planet and use the outside shielding, and you'd have a great atmosphere inside. You could even add an artificial sun that would be balanced right in the center. So, I mean, to me, this is the optimal way to travel in space. And so all these arguments about how it's not close enough to the sun, and there's missing the boat. This is advanced interstellar travel is what it is. It's how they travel. And it's standard, and so that part I never could get. And they never said they lived on the outside of the planet. They just said that they had a planet that they used to travel around in.
Wait. Well, is it possible that they could live on the outside? Because if you subscribe to the idea that the sun does not transmit heat, it transmits electromagnetic energy to the planets, and the planets have a filtering system which puts all the ingredients necessary.
That's all true, but the problem would be that space is an extremely dangerous place with gamma ray bursts and synchrotron radiation, and I mean, you're fried. You're fried. If you don't have a super heavy atmosphere protecting you from all this stuff, you're fried. And the thing is, you don't need any of that. I mean, you wouldn't be able to. I mean, you might be able to hold on to an atmosphere out in deep space. I don't know. But the real point is, it wouldn't matter anyway because you just live on the inside. That would be easier. That's what's going on. That's the big hidden part that we don't understand, is that a lot of the aliens that are around are living on the inside of moons. They're not living on the outside. They're living on the inside of our moon. They're living on the inside of some of the moons like Iapetus that are out in the solar system. So this is one of the big secrets, is that you need six feet of extremely dense material to protect yourself from the dangers of outer space. At least 6 feet. And hollowing out, so easy to find planets and moons and asteroids, and hollowing out one would really not be so difficult. And then you just go inside, and then you give yourself some spin by putting a rocket or whatever, some kind of motor to get your spin going, and then now you've got gravity, you're protected from the dangers of space. You add in an artificial sun, which would balance right in the center because there would be 0 G in the very center of your hollowed-out sphere, so it could just sit there nice and perfect without going anywhere. And you can go anywhere in the world, anywhere in the universe without having to worry. You can grow food on the inside. You could have streams and mountains, and so that is really the future of space travel. And I think that's how the Anunnaki are traveling around. And a lot of other races, too, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure Iapetus is artificial. In his book, Our Occulted History, Jim Mars did talk about how the equatorial bulge that encircles Iapetus is definitely not a natural formation. By the way, are you sure our moon is artificial? I'm 100% sure of it.
Oh, it is artificial, absolutely.
Totally, yeah.
It's hollow. That's how they traveled here. That's how we got here. We got here on the moon. That's how the human race got to this area. It was our ship.
Okay. Well, I'm sure some people might Might debate how we got here because there's some debate over where the moon came from. I mean, some people say it was from the Chauta star system, but John Lear, in my interview with him, he said it was built on Jupiter. So there is a little bit of a debate in this issue. But I don't want to.
I got into a very wealthy person who really liked me years ago when I was a very young person. He was a very wealthy guy, and he had probably the most astounding occult book collection that I've ever seen in my entire life. He collected occult books like, candy. And he had a big mansion in Seattle, and he let me come, and I could read any book. I couldn't take it from his library, but I could come to his house at any time and read his books. And he had the most astounding number of ancient Masonic books that I've ever seen in my life. And I've asked other Masons later in life if they knew about these books, and they went, no, never heard of it. So I read these books, and they were 1500s, very difficult to read, and they said that we came here originally from Sirius on the moon, and that Sirius was it was turning into a red giant, and in fact Owen Gingrich, astronomer at Boston University, has gone through the ancient literature and found that 3000 BC, 4000 BC, Sirius was described as big and red. And if stellar evolution is correct, the next wave after a red giant would be a white dwarf, which is what it is right now. So I don't know if any of that's true, but Sirius is only 8.7 light years away. It may very well be that our sun and Sirius are in a combined orbit. In other words, we are in a orbit of Sirius. A lot of people have found evidence that this is true, and so there's a lot of strange things about Sirius, including, again, weird numerical correspondences and things that are just kind of strange and off the wall. And so, I mean, I don't know. I'm just telling you, this is what I heard. I'm very open-minded about these things. I don't know if ancient Freemasonic books really are telling me the truth. I know there's manipulation going on there, and I think Sitchin's work is very interesting. So I'm not one of those people that trashes Sitchin.
When it comes to history of outer space, there's a lot of different stories as to where humans came from and such. Lyra seems to be the most common thing. But hey, I have no reason to think they don't come from Sirius and other places. But
well, I think here's the thing: is it possible maybe all are true?
Yeah, I certainly can go.
Yeah, I do too. I think they're kind of all true, and the universe is alive. The universe is filled with intelligence, and apparently the human form is quite common. Not exactly like us, but close to the way we look: 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and so was there a universe seeding campaign? It would certainly seem to make sense, wouldn't it? If you were a highly advanced race, say 1 million years more advanced than we are, then wouldn't it make sense to send probes out in all directions with seeds for life? I mean, wouldn't that be a high priority almost? And so I think there's many, many explanations for what's going on here. And I don't want to take any one, but this idea that we took the moon from Sirius to here is really intriguing, I have to say. And the Druids, by the way, also said that the moon is a glass boat. It's very interesting because it does look like the moon is made out of some kind of glass-like quality.
Yeah, the moon. Well, people will be able to handle the truth about the moon being artificial. Well, many of them can't. But I want to switch gears here. Let's get back to John Major Jenkins for a moment, talking about what the Mayan calendar was. Well, he said it was a calendar of consciousness, no question. But he talked about how at the end of the calendar, around 2012, the Mayan calendar acknowledges that there are malevolent and benevolent forces. He said that the malevolent forces are going to be the entity that symbolizes the return of the Mayan mythological figure known as Seven Macaw, and he said that in our time, Seven Macaw is the corporation. Could you perhaps elaborate on what John Major Jenkins is talking about there?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what he means quite by that, but I can't answer that. I don't know what he means. I don't want to speak for John because otherwise he'll get mad at me if I'm wrong.
All right. Well, actually, I read all about what he was talking about in his book, The 2012 Story. So if I had that book with me, I could certainly answer the question I just asked you. I just wanted to make for a nice radio show conversation. But that's what he said. That Seven McCall is the corporation, and it's the malevolent entity that is in control in our time that our consciousness must overpower.
Well, like I can talk about that actually.
Okay.
So let's talk about the pyramid of reality, you might say. And I think we can understand the world and how we can change the world by understanding the pyramid or the power pyramid of reality. And the power pyramid of reality, at the very top of the pyramid are our owners. And I'm not even going to get into who they are. We all know who they are. But they're the people that own us. And they make all the decisions. And they're very evil, too, as you know. Underneath them, in the next layer of the pyramid, is the Fed, because this is how money is distributed. And so that becomes the most important organization in their arsenal. The third layer underneath this, on this pyramid of power, is international banks, Goldman Sachs, all these people. And they get their money from the Fed. And then the Fed decides who gives money, or the banks, I mean. The banks decide, the Fed decides what banks to get money, then the banks decide what corporations get money, and then the corporations decide what politicians get money, right? So the next layer underneath the banks is multinational corporations. And then they control everything below them via donations and all these other things. And everything else below multinational corporations, everything. Governments, fishermen, farmers, soldiers, generals, talk show hosts, writers, researchers, housewives, everybody's under there. The only place on the pyramid that's actually producing any real wealth is the bottom layer. But all the wealth we're creating is going up to the top, to the parasitical top four layers. Now here's the thing. All we have to do is get rid of the top four layers, starting with corporations and then the international bankers, the Fed, and then the owners. And we won't even hardly notice that they're gone, except that we'll have a lot more money and we'll have a lot more freedom. And so that's what I'm advocating. The revolution is to get rid of the top four layers of this broken pyramid, and so that does fit in with what John is saying, because this power structure is the evil entity that's going to destroy the world if we don't stop it.
Well, we're on a positive timeline, they say, so it all depends on how hard the people want to work to overpower the enemy. So,
well, I think I think we already won. I think the internet. We don't have to worry about Obama and the internet, because the internet the technology is so far outstripping the government's ability to regulate it that they're actually, right now, Obama's team is trying to regulate the internet of 10 years ago. And by the time these rules get through, the internet is going to be so far beyond them that the rules aren't even going to apply. So everything they're doing is arcane and backwards, and it's not going to work. But they are trying to stop the internet, that's for sure. Obama's trying to destroy the whole country. That's, of course, everybody knows that. But he has to get rid of the internet first. And that's going to be the line. That's going to be the thing that's going to draw everybody's ire. That's going to wake everybody up, including the millennials who, for some foolish reason, follow and worship this idiot president of ours. And when they see that he is taking away their beloved internet, and he is, that's what he's doing, folks, then they're going to get really pissed. So we'll see. And I don't believe that. I just think that we already won. I think that that there's. I've been around so long. I know that 20 years ago, nobody wanted to talk to me about any of this stuff, and now everybody wants to talk about it. And that means the awakening is tangible and real. And so I think that's what's going on.
Thanks. Okay, switching gears. Want to talk about Gothic cathedrals for a bit because Vincent Bridges did say in one of his History Channel documentaries, you don't go through the trouble of building a Gothic cathedral unless there is some significance behind the design. And I'm kind of familiar with Gothic cathedrals. I have one right near where I live. I don't live too far from the Bryn Athyn Gothic Cathedral, which is the global de facto headquarters for the New Church, which is Swedenborgian, the New Church of the New Jerusalem, it's also called. And I don't know, the town of Bryn Athyn, it's like a nature lover's paradise, but it kind of seems to have Illuminati written all over it, not just because of the Gothic cathedral there, but also because the prominent and rich family that lives in Bryn Athyn is the Pitcairn family, and there's a lot of incest going on in the Pitcairn family, which is kind of reminds you of the incest going on in the prominent Illuminati bloodlines. Kind of makes you wonder, but I hope nobody from Bryn Athyn comes after me for saying this on my show. But anyway, I just want to point out I am familiar with Gothic cathedrals because I live near one. It's a fascinating structure, but I look at it and I'm thinking, hey, there seems to be some significance behind this. So Gothic cathedrals, tell us what they are, what their symbolism is, and maybe if you can answer any of these questions that I have about the Bryn Athyn Gothic Cathedral, if you know anything about it, please enlighten me.
I don't know anything about that cathedral, but I know a lot about Gothic cathedrals. And again, Gothic cathedrals have that same number correspondences that are built into the pyramids and into Stonehenge and into Washington, D.C. So again, whoever built them was ensconcing some very advanced knowledge into the design. And you also have to ask yourself, there's 500 Gothic cathedrals built between 1100 and 1400, and only the Black Plague really stopped the construction of the Gothic cathedrals. And you have to wonder, well, who's behind this? The church says they never paid for any of it. And my answer is, I believe that the Gothic cathedrals were an experiment by the Templars, a societal experiment. And what they were doing is they were trying to enlighten Europe. They had gone to the Middle East and they'd learned alchemy and all this advanced stuff from the Arabs in the Middle East, and they realized that Europe was way, way behind in knowledge gathering because of the Catholic Church. And they began to take a somewhat dim view of the Catholic Church because of this, a church outlawing reading and writing and teaching science and math. And so when they got back after their crusade, or maybe even while the crusade was going, we don't know, they decided that they were going to use the magical knowledge that they had gained in the mystery schools in the Arab lands to enlighten Europe. And so what they did was they built these Gothic cathedrals, which were really telluric energy enhancers. And what they learned, of course, in these schools in the Middle East was that alchemists believe that there's this invisible energy called telluric forces, and that you might call them Wilhelm Reich's orgone, or they're all the same. And that there are ways that you can attract down the good telluric forces into your villages and towns so that the people's minds are waking up. In other words, the telluric forces are sort of like the great alignment of the Mayan calendar. You kind of wake up if you're in the midst of these telluric generators. So they built these cathedrals out of granite using sacred proportion, and then they put the steeples up, and the steeples and the towers were designed to draw down the telluric forces, these invisible forces, and then they would draw them down through the granite, just like the Great Pyramid is a telluric force generator. The telluric force hits the point at the top of the generator, at top of the pyramid, and then it spreads out through the granite surface, downhill until it hits the very bottom, and then spreads out through the surrounding community. And that's what these cathedrals did. And they would, and what's interesting is that the Black Death stopped the cathedral making for the most part, but the cathedral stayed there, drawing down all these advanced telluric forces into the villages. The cathedrals were always built on the highest hill in the village, and that's for a reason, because if you're trying to gather up these orgone or telluric forces, you want to be at the highest point. And it was actually a kind of a secret rebellion against the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church didn't know quite why the Templars were building all these, but they were quite happy to let them do it because they were nice and big, and the Catholic Church likes to spend money, or likes to look like they're spending money anyway, and they didn't have to pay for it. And so they let them build it, but really in the end they signed their own death wish, because what had happened was when these cathedrals were finally built and the telluric forces were pouring into these villages all over Europe, with 200 years later, boom, the Enlightenment happened, the Renaissance, and that overthrew the Catholic Church. Am I saying that the Renaissance would not have occurred without the building of the Gothic cathedrals? I am saying that exactly, that the building of the Gothic cathedrals forced Europeans to learn math, to learn geometry, to learn how to read and write and communicate with each other, and that turned the tide against the church, keeping everybody as dumbasses, and brought on the scientific and artistic revolutions of the Renaissance.
Thanks for giving your take on that. All right, let's talk about alchemy. Seems like we're an hour and 15 minutes in. We haven't even mentioned alchemy yet, but what is alchemy? My understanding is it's just making things pure again, not necessarily utopia, but making things new, pure again. And I remember you saying Einstein used to read books on alchemy before going to bed, and it was basically what preceded chemistry. So I guess tell us, what is alchemy?
Well, alchemy is in a way kind of the opposite of science. So science looks down into nature and tries to break nature apart and break it into tiny pieces so it can understand how nature works. Alchemy looks up into the whole and tries to find ways that nature corresponds with each other. A little bit different viewpoint. So science is only concerned with that which can be repeated. So if it can't be repeated in a systematic way, then science doesn't want to deal with it. So water always boils at 220 degrees, so that's good science. And sun always rises at the same time of the year, so that's repeatable. So that's science. Alchemy is much more interested in the singularity, the thing that doesn't get repeated ever. Maybe it only happens once every 10,000 years or once every 5 years or something. It's the odd thing that alchemy is interested in, the weird thing, that truly strange moment when everything comes together. So, psychiatry will say, well, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result is the essence of insanity. Well, so therefore alchemists were insane because they did their experiments every single day and almost always met with failure. And I say, yeah, that could be viewed as insane, I guess. But what the alchemist is really doing, by doing the same experiment over and over and over and over, is he's waiting. He's not as aware of the universe as he would like to be. Yes, he can study the stars, and yes, he can study, different systems to decide when and where to do his experiments, but he still doesn't know the intricacies of all of the cycles that he has to deal with. So he does his experiment every day knowing that one day all the cycles are going to be in the right place at the right time, and his experiment's going to succeed. Now, they did I'm going to forget the name, Fleischmann and Pons did the cold fusion experiments in the early 90s, and they were very successful. They were producing more electricity than they were putting into the system. And so other scientists read their research, and then they did it, and some succeeded and some didn't. It became this very mysterious thing. Why weren't Pons and Fleischmann's cold fusion experiments able to be repeated? Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. And I would suggest that what the cold fusion experiments were is alchemy, and that Pons and Fleischmann just had the right things going on the right day, and it would work. They did cold fusion experiments on Pikes Peak in Colorado, and it works all the time. You do cold fusion experiments at MIT, and it never works. So is it place? Is it time? Is it different variances that we have not yet considered? And the answer is that is what alchemy looks at. Alchemy looks at the nuances and the variances in things, and then decides when the right time and place to do something is. So that's why it's so interesting. And what this does, of course, is the mere fact that you're looking at the worlds in this way, you begin understanding the things that connect everything together, which is the very essence of alchemy, is understanding the way that everything is connected. So if you're an advanced alchemist, you know that there are correspondences between the most unlikely of things, between the most unlikely of events, between points in history that should not even have any correspondence, but you know that they do. And you know that the world is a more subtle place of smaller energies that can be moved and taken, and anything is possible. You can turn yourself into anything you want to be. You can take base metals and turn them into higher refined metals. All of these things are possible within this, and all were known by this extremely advanced civilization that was destroyed by the comets.
Thank you very much. Let's switch gears again. The Denver airport. I saw the Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura episode on 2012. It was one of the more joke episodes of the series because it seemed to have a doomsday orientation, and that didn't happen because we were on a positive timeline. However, people like Alfred Weber and Andrew Bishago have talked about the government using time travel technology back in the day, looked in the future, and they saw that we were on a negative timeline, so they made underground bases called DUMBs, deep underground military bases, but it turned out to be a dumb idea, if you'll pardon the pun, because we're not on a we're not on a negative timeline. Now we're on a positive timeline, so those bases aren't going to be necessary. And like I said, as the theory goes, the Denver airport was one of those bases. But aside from that, what else can you tell us about the Denver airport?
Well, I'm one of the first people that really figured out that something really strange was going on there. What happened was that I went to the airport for the first time. It was built in 94 or 95, and I went there for the first time in early 96, and I was in the height of my research on the Cross of Henday at the time, and I'm walking through this airport, and I see a statue of a gargoyle coming out of a suitcase, and I'm like, what? And then I walk into this big hallway where they do all the, searching your bags and stuff. And it's like this big tent in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like, what is this place? And then I got to the south side of the airport, and I saw the Masonic plaque that was there. And I got my interest got very heightened by this. Started going to the airport quite a bit, walking around and looking at some very, very odd and strange things, which I've still kept kind of secret because I'm still investigating them, that are at that airport. And I started wondering I remember the airport before, which was near downtown Denver, was a very good airport. I couldn't figure out why they did this, except maybe just to make money, by building this big airport out there. The airport itself is bigger than twice as big as Manhattan, which again I couldn't figure out. The landing patterns make a perfect swastika if you look at Google Earth, and so I put an ad in a local paper in Denver in the back, and I said, if you worked at Denver Airport, painting or doing drywall or plumbing or anything like that, I'd like to talk to you. I'm making a film about the airport. And I got, probably about 50 phone calls and from people who worked at the airport, building it. And every one of them, except for, I'd say 80% of them, said that there were these elevators that just went down and down and down, and they didn't know how far down they went, and they didn't know what, but they were, they had to work in a certain area. They had guards over them. They had to sign things saying they couldn't talk. They would not let me use their names. A lot of them would not even meet me and would only talk to me by phone. But the stories corresponded so closely with each other that as a journalist, I just had to say this was probably true. So then I started looking into why they would put this airport and this underground base here. And that's when I found out, I heard rumors that they were hollowing out some of the mountains that were in the Colorado right near the airport. People that were in the, hunters and fishermen and stuff would say that you see truck after truck coming out of this road with, rocks piled in the truck, 100 trucks a day, every day for years, right? And then I said, wow, they're hollowing out the mountains. And then I discovered a little-known government, at the time, a little-known government program called COG, or Continuity of Government. And it said that they had to take every precaution necessary, that if a disaster should occur, that they have to keep the government going no matter what. And so therefore, I looked at a map and I realized that if you were in the federal government and you knew an emergency was coming, Denver is almost an equal flight from anywhere in the country, from Florida to Seattle to New England to California. All about 2.5 hours you can hit Denver for the furthest extremities of the United States, maybe 3 hours at the most. And so everybody has an equal shot at this thing. You land at the airport, you go down the elevator, you jump in the trains, and you go to your safety places underneath the mountains. All part of COG, Continuity of Government. Makes total and complete sense. And I came out with that story, and I've had several insiders tell me that they were completely blown away that anyone had figured out this whole thing. And that's the story of Denver International Airport, still there. The airport, after many, many times saying that Jay Weidner was a complete ass and there was nothing underneath the airport, has now admitted that there are tunnel systems under the airport. So there you go.
You go, Jay. Way to make them admit they were lying.
Yep,
okay,
and local Channel 9 in Denver asked me if I would appear in a debate with the guy who runs DIA, and I said, oh, yeah, let me in, baby, and he said no.
Chicken. All right. Well, all right, let's move on. Got a little over half an hour left. Got some subjects to discuss. Let's talk about the whole thing involving Carl Johann Kalimann's theories of the Mayan calendar. He talked about how, I don't know what he thinks happened 16.4 billion years ago when his calendar happens. People nowadays are starting to say that the Big Bang, as they say in the British Isles, is just a bunch of bullocks. There was no Big Bang because we're all infinite, and well, the fact that we're infinite in and of itself shows that there must be no Big Bang. I remember I recently read David Icke's book, The Perception Deception. He has a chapter in that book called Big Bang Bullocks, where he shows the evidence that it's not true. But I don't know what Carl Johann Kalimann thinks happened that time, but I seriously doubt it was a Big Bang. Maybe it was a timeline incursion, because Andrew Bartzis, Akashic Records reader, said there was a massive timeline incursion that happened 54 million years ago that caused massive karma. Maybe something similar happened then. But the thing I really want to focus on is the end date of October 28th, 2011. What did happen that day? Well, Alfred Weber, in his interviews with Andromeda Council contact Etolic, said that was the day when the cosmic fluctuations of male and female energies emanating from the center of the Milky Way galaxy would be balanced. And Ian Zell-Lungold, in the presentations he's done to talk about Kalimann's theory, said that was the day that everything that has ever happened in the 16.4 billion years before happens all at once at the same time, and everybody in the audience was like, what the hell's that supposed to mean? And Ian Zellungle said, I can't explain it any further. That's the only way I can state it. Well, George Kavaslis, in my private session my radio show interview with him, he did tell me what that meant. He said that was a day that massive timelines came together on a very large scale. And that is another reason why I think maybe at the beginning of the 16.4 billion year calendar, that many years ago, the Kaliman starts, it was a timeline incursion, perhaps. So in regard to Kaliman's work, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I'm somewhat baffled by his work, and I like him as a person a lot, but sometimes it feels like he's reaching. I'm just saying. And I remember when we were getting close to that date, he was sending out all these emails that the dollar was going to collapse and the wars were going to happen, and kind of nothing of that sort really occurred, which made me kind of lose faith in him. So I prefer not to comment on him. I mean, I like him as a person, but I just don't know about his work. I don't know that much about it. However, I do want to tell you what Terence McKenna used to say about the Big Bang, because I think it's well worth repeating. Terence McKenna said that science says that if you just give them one free miracle, they can explain everything else. And the Big Bang is that one free miracle that we give science.
One free miracle. Well, if you accept the fact that we're infinite consciousness, then anything is possible. So I suppose...
I think he was being funny. He was trying to be funny.
Right.
He was saying science can only explain reality by resorting to a miracle.
Okay. Well, actually, since you mentioned Terence McKenna, some people like Jan Irvin have talked about, and even Alex Jones talked about, how Terence McKenna was involved with the Illuminati, and so are some of the other people in psychedelics like Timothy Leary and Albert Hoffman and John Lilly.
I know Jan.
Were they frauds?
No, I think definitely Terence was in the Illuminati. He and I used to get in some pretty violent arguments about conspiracy theories, and he was very hypocritical in that. And he would tell me that there was no conspiracy, and then he would go to another friend of mine and tell him how vast and deep the conspiracy really was. So at the time, in the mid-'90s, I was quite baffled by Terence's behavior. But then when Jan Irwin found his little speech he gave at the Esalen in California, where he pretty much admits that he was an agent, it all came together for me. I think what happened is that Terence was probably busted smuggling drugs into the country by the DEA, and they sat him down. They said, "Hey, we're looking for a guy to, kind of infiltrate the whole psychedelic movement, and you're a big member of that, and we want you to be the guy. Otherwise, you go to jail for 30 years. And so Terence went, well, okay.
Well, do you think the same thing might have been true with Albert Hoffman, John Lilly, and Timothy Leary?
I do.
Oh.
I think they're all CIA. I think the whole thing is CIA. Not Albert Hoffman. I'm going to forget his name. Wasson, the guy that discovered, the first white guy to discover magic mushrooms in Mexico, he got on the cover of Life magazine with this. Why would Life magazine give a cover to magic mushrooms in the 50s? And it's easy, because Life magazine was being controlled by the CIA. We know that. And the CIA wanted this stuff out. Now, why does it want it out? That's the part, Jan Irvin and I will go around and around trying to figure out why the CIA wanted all these psychedelics out and bombing us and everything. And I think it was they wanted to destroy the previous culture, the culture of my parents. And they needed to replace it with a culture of people that could be more easily controlled. And, I think, I'm not sure it worked, but it was definitely an attempt. And Timothy Leary on his deathbed, friend of mine was in the room, and he said, come on, Tim, were you with the CIA? And Tim looked over at him and went, who the fuck do you think I should join, the KGB? So there you go.
Thank you for Give me your take on that. Some people may agree to disagree with you because they believe those people are true heroes to the truth
yeah,
of
I know
movements.
those.
But
I get into that all the time. I lose more friends when they find out that I think the 1960s was a bunch of bunk and hokum. They get really upset at me but it is. I mean, I've read Dave McGowan's Laurel Canyon series. I know David. The whole rock and roll scene was all created by the CIA. We now know that the whole Manson family murders were probably staged in order to make the hippie movement look bad. A lot of things are staged that we thought were real, and the Beatles were part of it. John Lennon was starting to figure out that he'd been completely manipulated when he got offed, or if he did get offed, and so Bob Dylan, we now know Bob Dylan purchased most of his songs from other songwriters, that he had a rich father who just bought his way into stardom. Bob Dylan probably didn't even write most of his own music. The whole thing is just clearly a fraud. Clearly, pop culture is completely made up. There's nobody real in it at all, as far as I can tell.
Thank you very much. Let's go back in time a bit further.
Bob Dylan fans get really upset at me, by the way.
I can imagine why. But let's go back in time a lot further. Let's talk about Nostradamus. We really haven't talked about him much here in regards to how he did his prophecies. I mean, his quatrains, why did he write them the way they did? Well, as the theory goes, a prophet is supposed to keep it vague. It's simple as that. Don't put it out in the open too obvious. Keep it vague. So you can that simply answers that question of why he wrote them the way they did. But in regards to how he saw his prophecies, it's called scrying. Okay, so can anybody do what he did, or do you have to be part of a secret society like he was to do what he did? I mean, how did he do what he did? How did he do? What did he do? Who is he working with? Tell us about Nostradamus and how he did what he did.
Well, I mean, we know that he probably was in a secret society, and that he was, and he was keeping his stuff vague also because we were right on the heels of the Inquisition. He didn't want to get his ass killed by the Catholic Church. He was half Jewish and was a little bit worried about that. And he knew that the royalty was watching him very closely. And so, he had good reason to be worried and to keep things vague. But yeah, he did scrying. I don't know if he got it from the secret society. I assume he did. And basically, he just looked into a bowl of water with a candle lit and let his eyes kind of drift and slowly kind of not close, but partially close. So the world takes on that kind of fogginess that happens when your eyes are partially closed. And in that, he would use a I'm going to forget the name of it. I have one sitting here right in front of me, and I can't remember it. It's a ambulatory. I'll come up with the name in a second. But it's essentially a way to tell where planets are. And so he would take the device, and he would I'm going to remember the name of this device before this show is over. And he would take this device, and he would put the planets into a place in a future time. So he would take the planets, he'd place them, say, in 1943. And then he would look into this bowl of water and with the candle lit in a dark room, and he would see the events of that year, sort of like watching television. And this is how he did his work. And again, the secret society, the reason that we probably both think he was in a secret society is because one of the things that these secret societies do is they have very advanced magical techniques that they keep hidden from us lesser folks. This is how they maintain their power, is because they understand the universe and the correspondences of the universe in a much more refined way than we do. And we know that this secret society is probably the same secret society that built Washington, D.C., with all the magic numbers and everything that were in it. And so I believe that Nostradamus was taken in. He was a gifted kid, and he was taken in, and they taught him these techniques, and then he went back and wrote his quatrains, in which, he predicts Napoleon, and he predicts Hitler, and he predicts a huge war coming very soon, and it looks like we're headed towards it. And so he ensconced it in mystery and hidden, so you couldn't understand it. like to talk about his most famous quatrain, which he mentions, 1999, the King of Terror shall come out of the skies and war will come. Well, in July and September, because we weren't sure, because 7 is September or 7 could also be July. So we weren't sure, so everybody was anticipating that either in July or in September of 1999, something terrible was going to happen because of this quatrain. Very few of Nostradamus' quatrain actually name a date. He named the date in this one, and nothing happened. So we were all disappointed, and because it didn't happen. But actually, something did happen, because just like with everything else with Nostradamus, you can't take the quatrain at face value. So what is really going on? Okay, what's really going on is that in 7 or September of not 1999, but exactly inverted of that number, in 9111. Get it? Not 1999, but 9111. In September, 911 in the year 1 is when it happened. So Nostradamus even predicted 9/11. The King of Terror shall come from the skies and war will come. He predicted it. He just didn't predict. He laid the date down, but the date had to be inverted. Another Nostradamus mystery solved. Anyway,
I'd like to give you one little, one Nostradamus skeptic that I think people should have their eye on. James Randi. He wrote a book called The Mask of Nostradamus. Sean Cohen, I've had her on my show. She's one of my biggest fans. She says she's really pissed off at him because of the way he discredits psychics. But it has been said by some that James Randi knows very well what's going on, but his job is to discredit people like psychics and Nostradamus. Do you subscribe to the idea that he knows what's going on, is discrediting everybody?
Yeah. There's a documentary out right now discrediting Randi completely. Very good film, and goes and shows exactly what you just said, that he even kind of believed in a lot of this stuff, but that wasn't his job. His job was to destroy any belief that human beings are more powerful than the dumb grunting apes they want us to believe we are. See, that's the thing, is they sell fear as a business model. This is the most important thing I can say, because you see, if we're not totally and completely afraid, then we are going to be brave. And if we're brave, then we're going to stand up to them. And so they need to keep us in a constant state of fear. And so they're not going to be able to sell their pharmaceutical drugs if we're not afraid. They're not going to be able to sell their war machines and their terrorism if we're not afraid. So they need us to be afraid so they can make money. So this is the problem that we're having, and they can't stop it. They're addicted to selling fear as a business model, and that's where we have to break with them. No more of this fear. Sandy Hook was fear as a business model. Boston bombing was fear as a business model. The terrorism, Charlie Hebdo, fear as a business model, and we can't break this cycle. So they're not going to stop, and they're going to keep us in constant fear. And so we have to be completely fearless. We have to say, no one died at Sandy Hook. No one died at Boston. We have nothing to be afraid of. We have nothing but good news to tell everybody. And we have to make them afraid of us. Exact opposite of what's happening. So Obama lets in all these illegal kids into the country, and now we have outbreaks of diseases everywhere going on, exactly the states where Obama is secretly putting these people, and so the powers that be, instead of saying, oh, we shouldn't have let all these people into the country without checking them first and all that, instead of saying that, they, in their brilliant psychopathic behavior pattern, say that the anti-vaccine people are the reason that these diseases are all breaking out, and that we should do forced vaccines, which is where this is all going, by the way. And so this is, again, they're taking an incident that they created, and they're making a fearful incident, is fearful, send your children to a school where measles is breaking out, and then they're using it and pounding on the anti-vaccine people who are actually in the right. And this is so it's a brilliant twist around of making people who are actually trying to help the world into villains and make them look bad. And it's happening. It's working. I mean, I see it. I see the people that are on the fence on vaccines now saying, well, maybe vaccines are all right, because they're seeing they're seeing what's going on with the world right now, and they don't want to get caught up in that scene. So they don't want to, they okay, I'll just go along with it and try to fight it, and we have to fight it.
We do have to fight it indeed. By the way, we got about 15 minutes, 40 seconds left on the live stream. The live stream will end then, but if you want to go over just maybe a couple minutes to finish up, that's fine. Just the live feed will end in about 50 minutes and 40 seconds. So one subject I wanted to talk about, tarot cards. I'm trying to become familiar with tarot cards now. I do use the tarot deck. I use the Deviant Moon Tarot. Don't use it all that much, just if a question comes up that I feel they could help me answer. Watching some Michael Tsarian videos of late, I definitely recommend him as a tarot card expert, Michael Tsarian. He knows a lot about it. Tarot cards, I remember you saying in your book about the Cross of Henday that you actually, in some pictures, put tarot cards on certain parts of the cross, and it helped you uncover the mysteries of the cross. I guess I'll let you talk about that. But in regards to tarot cards, how do you know that they work? Can you silence the skeptics on their symbolism and how they work?
Well, I mean, all divination systems, whether it's I Ching or Tarot or any of them, what they're doing is they're measuring the moment. That's what's going on there. So you're like in a stream, going down a stream, and you're trying to figure out where you are in the stream, and so you pull out a map and you look. And the map tells you, well, you're going to have a rock up ahead, so you better be careful, whatever. And that's what the Tarot does. The Tarot measures where you are in the stream of time and helps guide you through through all of that. And I think that again, I believe that the Tarot deck came from this culture that was here before, and that it is and the I Ching also too came from this previous culture, and they again, you look at the correspondences, the 21, 22 central cards, and 7 into 22 is pi. Again, you see all these incredible correspondences with the Tarot deck, and the Tarot deck has a profound relationship to the Cross of Henday, actually, where this card, I'm going to make sure I get this right, 17, 18, 19, 20, yeah. Card 17 in the Tarot deck is the moon, and it's a fairy tale moon, looks just like the moon on the Cross of Henday. Card 18 is the sun, and again, it looks just like the sun on the Cross of Henday. And card 19 is, I'm going to forget now, but it corresponds to the cycle, the circle cycle. And then card 20 is the star, which is the star that's on the Cross of Henday. It's an 8-pointed star, and it's exactly the same. So the Cross of Henday, and all these lead up to the Day of Judgment, which is the next card. And so, which is what the Cross of Henday is talking about, that there will be this Day of Judgment when a disaster occurs, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, a comet breaking up into 4 pieces, the whole thing. And so there's this. So the Tarot deck is really just like trying to catch a moment in time, like the I Ching. And people will decry it who don't understand the higher dimensional nature of humans and life here. And that's fine. I don't waste time arguing with people who don't believe. I use the tarot deck all the time, and I know it's true, and I know it helps me all the time. And here's what thing. What the difference between success and failure is the ability to make good decisions. So, somebody's life is all screwed up, and you start looking at their life, you see, in most cases, not always, but in most cases, they made a whole bunch of bad decisions in their life. They bought the wrong car, they married the wrong woman, they took the wrong job, they commuted to the wrong city. There are millions of, they punched their kid when they shouldn't have, got sent to jail. Who knows? Everybody makes it. So the way that to be successful in life, whether you want to be spiritually successful or materially successful or whatever, is, of course, to make good decisions. And that's all these divination things are for. They're to help you make good decisions. And so when I'm about to make a very large decision in my life, I consult the tarot deck. I consult the I Ching. And it helps guide me. I don't use it as like, oh, it told me to do this, well, I'm going to do that. It's a guide. It's like a map. It's not necessarily reality, but it's a resemblance of reality that's there to help you navigate reality.
Thanks. By the way, we do have a caller. Right? We do have enough time to take it. About 10 minutes left. Caller, area code 586. You are on the air. Welcome. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your question? Hello, area code 586. Are you just listening? Okay, I guess they're just listening.
Didn't want
All
to
right, so, oh well. So, anyway, about the tarot cards again. In my recent interview with Psychic Farusha, she knew someone shortly before 9/11 happened who was repeatedly pulling cards out of the tarot deck, and before 9/11 happened, the card she kept pulling out was the Tower Tarot, and that the Deviant Moon Tarot card, which I use on the Tower card, it shows a ray of energy coming from the moon to destroy the tower. Kind of makes me wonder if the direct energy weapon that took down the Twin Towers was a direct energy death ray on a space-based platform in Earth's orbit, which John Lear said is what he believes in my interview with him. But anyway, do you believe that the Tower Tarot, and also other tarots for that matter, do symbolize significant events, specific events in history? And if so, what are those events besides 9/11, the Tower Tarot?
I do actually. I think that they're very significant. I think that I think the tower, of course, is what happened to the world after the comets hit. And the tower is always associated with destruction and fire, and I think that's what it is symbolizing. Again, a lot of this information has gotten lost, but I mean, if you look at like the Day of Judgment card, you can see that one of the stars looks like a little bit like a comet. It's got a little tail on it above the people. And so, yeah, I do believe that. I believe that these are mostly probably events that happened before 13,000 years ago, very significant events in the history of the previous highly advanced civilization. And I believe the Tarot and the I Ching and other things, astrology, are all based on this attempt by the alchemists to discover the right moment to perform their very important experiments. And so they would use the tarot cards, and they'd say, okay, and they'd throw them, and then they'd say, okay, we're ready. And then they would do it, or no, we can't do it. And he says, no, don't do it. And again, you're trying to find out where you are in that moment so you can make the right decisions about your life. And there's a great expert, a friend of mine, Paul O'Brien, who really, he's written several books on divination, and he talks about the importance of making decisions and using all the tools that you have to make sure that your decisions are right. I've known several very, very wealthy men, and I guarantee you, there's one thing that every single extremely wealthy guy I know has in common. They all have astrologers. They all believe this stuff, by the way. I
have no reason to think astrology is fake either. But by the way, we do have another caller. I don't know if it's the same person, but this is area code 734. Just so you know, area code 734. You'll have about 7 minutes left when I let you on the air. So area code 734, you're on the air. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your question?
Hi, guys. It's Diane in Michigan, and it's really an honor to speak with you, and especially Jay. I've followed his research for years, and Jay, you've been right on. And I applaud you for coming out. And that's why, you're right, the energy's ramping up and people are feeling that urge to look for knowledge. But I have a question for you. I wondered if you were aware of the work of Gaz Stone and Lily talking about the Earth timeline and how originally when the Dracos started this mess back in Atlantis and they put us on this time loop. And it totally corresponds with the ancient Hopi teachings that I follow of the prophecy rock, where Mother Earth was on the normal Earth timeline, and you can follow that way back. But then it was interrupted, and their time is up now. And I just recently found these two people that explain the ancient teachings in a way that many can understand. And I wondered if you were aware of them, and if you were, what was your opinion? Thank you.
No, I'm not aware of it. It sounds really interesting. I can't be aware of everything, but it does sound very interesting.
Well, it totally corresponds, and it links your work. And so if you have time to check it out, it would be wonderful, because I always look to see, my friend told me you were on, and so I'd love to hear your opinion of it, whatever next interview that you do. We'll all be waiting, because it just flabbergasted me that these two people are explaining it in such detail. And what it is that when it was supposed to flip in 2012, it was the energy that was changing, and they wanted to move it to this positive timeline and keep everybody entrained in their wheel of time. But Mother Earth said enough, and they've been doing everything that they can to straighten her back on her axis so they can open their portals and have what they want. But Mother Earth is in control now, and it's time for humanity to come back to the ways of Mother Earth and let the synthetic universe go its way. And when we come back to Mother Earth, that our vibration will be raised along with hers. And everything that you've researched and what these people are saying it just made my spirit happy to hear you tonight. I put a few words in the chat room right on, and kudos for the chicken, for you taking up the chicken at the Denver airport. They can't come at you because you have raised your knowledge and your wisdom and your vibration to rise above that.
Yeah, it's too bad, because I really wanted to debate that guy. So I have a question for you. Is it cold in Michigan?
Oh, my God. We're buried. We've never had these below zero temperature breaking records. I've had it. I'm ready to go to Arizona or anywhere there's not snow and below zero weather, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I just heard from a friend in Bangor, Maine, 10 feet of snow in his yard.
Well, we have family there, and up around Strong and that, they got like 13 feet.
Yep, he says he can't even look out his windows of his house.
Well, what's going on right now is, since their flip didn't happen the way they wanted it to happen in 2012 to get it back in, because it was, so long negative, now positive, then negative, and reincarnation positive. Well, it didn't work for them because Mother Earth changed the vibration and said, no longer will you do this, and the game's over. And so we're all celebrating, that humanity is going to wake up now and come back to the Earth. And
well, I hope you're right. I'd like to see that stuff. If you can get me at jweidner at sacredmysteries.com. If you send me the email or whatever about that, I'd like to look that up.
jweidner at sacredmysteries.com.
Yep.
Well, I emailed you years ago. I'm Spirit Rider. And I think the last time I emailed you, the one I had didn't work. I got it back.
Well, go to jweidner.com, and it says contact. And just do that. That's a lot easier.
Right. Well, I honor you for speaking truth.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I need all the support I can get.
That's all right. It's our time.
Yes, it is.
It is our time indeed.
Yep.
Take care, Diane. Glad you're in the chat room, too.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Well, Jay, we unfortunately don't have time to discuss any further questions at this moment, so I guess I'll bring the show to an end by telling you the same thing that I tell all of my guests. Jay, one of my goals with this radio show is to get as many different people on my show as possible. Before I give any one specific guest double dips, you are a fascinating individual, and I have no doubt that if I wanted to, I could easily do another show with you, but because of my mission to keep getting different people on, I regret to say I probably will not be asking you to come on my show again, but that's only because I need to give thousands of other fascinating individuals a chance at some glory on my radio show. But I promise you, I will make sure that this interview gets spread far and wide. I'll upload it to YouTube, and as soon as the Facebook Nazis lift my ban off Facebook, well, they actually said that they did, but they've lied to me. I still cannot post on groups. But when they do, I will get posting this interview and all the other interviews that I wanted to post on many group pages and such to get the word out about these important things. So, Jay, it was a pleasure having you on. I learned a lot from you, even from this interview. I was familiar with the work before, but now I'm even more familiar with it now. So, by the way, you got a minute left. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, I have a new feature film coming out called The Last Avatar, and I'm showing it all over the country. If you go to thelastavatarmovie.com and you want to show our film, or you know somebody who has a movie theater in your town